Hello guys! Today I'm sharing how to make very light and airy raspberry mousse that melts in your mouth. So let's get started. Here are the ingredients for the mousse, and this is for the sauce. Today we're also making the delicious sauce to go with the mousse. First, start from hydrating gelatin. When you're using gelatin powder, mix it with 5 times more amount of icy water and it mixes really well to ensure that every piece of gelatin is hydrated well, and set it aside for about 10 minutes. When you're using gelatin sheets, you just have to dip them in icy water and again wait for about 10 minutes. This hydration process is very important for the mousse to set properly. Then after that, I usually start pureeing raspberries. Puree it well to make very smooth raspberry mousse. And strain it. Use a fine sieve to remove all the seeds. And we are using raspberry puree for both mousse and sauce. So today I pureed both of them at the same time to save some time. Here I am dividing for the mousse and for the sauce. So let's finish off the raspberry sauce first because it's so easy to make. Simply heat the puree, sugar, and lemon juice together until it starts boiling. And that's it. Chill it in the fridge before use. Today I decided to lay some sponge cake on glasses and pour some of that raspberry sauce. And I used this sponge cake. This sponge is so fluffy. It goes so well with this light raspberry mousse. And set it aside. Now let's go back to the raspberry mousse. This is the puree we set aside earlier. And take about 1/4 to 1/3 of it and heat it to melt gelatin. And when you set it aside in the fridge, you can take it out so easily, like this. And cut it with the spatula so that it melts easier. Gelatin starts melting with about 50 Celsius, so we want the puree to be around that temperature by the time all the gelatin is melted. Check carefully to see if all the gelatin is melted for the mousse to set properly. If the gelatin is not completely melted, simply heat it up and check again. Once it's done, pour some of the cold puree, mix well. Pour it back to the bowl and mix well. Add lemon juice and mix. And set it aside. And next, let's whip heavy cream. Whip it until it gets fluffiest. It's the fluffiest you can get before it starts separating. With this recipe, we use minimum amount of gelatin, but instead we use very stiff whipped cream and meringue. And that's the secret to the fluffy mousse that can hold a shape but melts in your mouth. And set it aside in the fridge until right before using it. And next, let's make Italian meringue. Prepare your egg white in a cream bowl and ensure that no yolks are mixed in it. In a pot, add sugar and water. Ensure that sugar is wet all around. Brush the side with water and heat it up at medium heat. And as I started heating the pot, I usually start whipping egg white as well. We want a very fluffy meringue by the time the syrup is ready. Once the meringue gets very bubbly, like shampoo, add sugar for the egg white and continue whipping. Brush the side a couple times more on the way to prevent the sugar from getting crystallized. And heat the hot syrup until it reaches to 244 to 246 Fahrenheit. Today I heat it to 246 Fahrenheit. And the meringue should look this fluffy before you add syrup. Add the syrup slowly from the side as you whip it at high speed, like this. Continue whipping it at high speed. Touch the bowl on check, and once it feels gently warm, turn it down to medium-low speed. And stop when it doesn't feel anything. The meringue shouldn't be hot or warm at all, so that the heavy cream can stay nice and fluffy when they are combined. And now I'm checking the heavy cream, and you can see that it's a little bit looser, so I whipped it. Add all the meringue to the whipped cream and fold them together until about 50% is blended. We do not want to overmix to make very airy mousse. And add about half of the raspberry puree and fold. And before you add, check that your raspberry puree is nice and cold, but not freezing cold. It shouldn't be thickened because of gelatin yet. If it looks like the gelatin is reacting already and getting thickened, simply heat it up just a tiny bit. Do not use warm puree because whipped cream and meringue lose volume and the mousse gets a lot looser because of that. And again, stop when it's about 50% is blended and add the rest of puree and continue folding. And I like to use a whisk for this because whipped cream and Italian meringue is pretty stiff and the puree is liquid. There are two different textures here. With the whisk, you can combine them faster and you can also eliminate lumps of whipped cream a lot easier with the whisk. And before they are evenly blended, when about 80 to 90% is blended, like this, I switch to a spatula and clean up the side and the bottom of the bowl and pick up anything else that was not blended. And stop right after they are evenly incorporated. And we want to use it immediately while the condition is the best. And chill it in the fridge until it's set completely. And decorate it with anything you like, such as whipped cream, fresh raspberries, other kinds of fruits and herbs. And it is complete. Enjoy. The mousse is so airy and light and it tastes very, very raspberry. You'll need to take the extra step to make the meringue, but it's so worth it. I think you're gonna love it. Ray had her birthday last month and I made her birthday cake using this raspberry mousse. I used my biscuit sponge cake. I'll leave the link below, including all the other recipes I mentioned today. And I soaked it up with the mixture of cake syrup and raspberry puree. and I added some fresh raspberries and strawberries. And I turned the raspberry sauce into this raspberry glaze by adding gelatin to it. Check out the amount and all the details about this cake in the description. And once it's set, decorate it with some fruits and some fancy stuff on top. I usually use gelatin sheets, but today I wanted to show you how to make it with gelatin powder because I got so many questions in the past about how to use it. So just like you saw, I usually like to mix it with about 5 times more amount of icy water. Either you use gelatin sheets or gelatin powder. I want you to take a look at bloom, which is the strength of gelatin. For the longest time, I like to use this gelatin sheet. The bloom is 230, and that's very strong. So the higher the number is, the firmer your mousse gets. And currently I live in the States, and the most popular gelatin that you can get anywhere at the grocery stores are from Knox. And I came to find out that their bloom is so close to the gelatin sheets I use. It's 225, so it's amazing. I was so excited to share that with you. So if you have your favorite gelatin, check if it's listed in the package. And if it doesn't, see if their website says anything about it. And when you want to make a whole cake with it, I have a few tips I wanted to mention. This mousse sets after 1 or 2 hours, but it gets slightly firmer and a little bit more stable overnight. You may want to just make it ahead and let it sit overnight to make it a little bit firmer and finish the next day. Or I have another option for you. I actually highly recommend freezing it if you can, not just because it sets quickly. You can also take out the cake from like cake ring, cake film, or silicone mold very beautifully without messing up the shape, and the difference is very big. This mousse can hold a shape, as you can see, but the minimum amount of gelatin is added. So let's say when the whipped cream is a little bit looser, or Italian meringue was a little bit looser than ideal, your mousse could get softer. So either you practice sometimes to avoid it, or you may want to increase the amount of gelatin slightly to avoid the risk. And lastly, to store it in the fridge, wrap the surface or store in an airtight container. And for any mousse, I recommend consuming it sooner than later because of all the ingredients inside. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.